Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. Ati Alubeli Sri Radha Mataji, whenever you're ready, you can start, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay, Mataji, yes.
Okay. My volume sounds kind of low on my side. Okay.
Yes.
But you can hear okay, right?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay, thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, dear devotee, tender pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Deva. I'll start by the prayers. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narotayam Devi Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jaya Udayraye Nastaprayase Advarshya Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam Bhakti Uttam Sloke Bhakti Bhavati Nastake. Today we're reading from Canto 3, verse 31. Canto 3, chapter 31, from 25 to 36. Text 25 to 36. Text 25. After coming, sorry, Guruji, my screen just went off. Text 25. After coming out of the abdomen, the child is given to the care of persons who are unable to understand what he wants, and thus he is nursed by such a person. Unable to refuse whatever is given to him, he falls onto undesirable circumstances. Text 26. Laid down on the foul bed infested with sweat and germs, the poor child is incapable of scratching his body to get relief from the itchy sensation, to say nothing of sitting up, standing, or even moving. Text 27. In his helpless condition, gnats, mosquitoes, bugs, and other germs bite the baby, whose skin is tender, just as a small worm bites a big worm. The child, deprived of his wisdom, cries bitterly. Text 28. In this way, the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kind of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood, he also suffers pain over desire to get things he can never achieve. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. Text 29. With the growth of the body, the living entity, in order to vanquish his soul, increases his false prestige and anger, and thereby creates enmity towards similarly lusty person. Text 30. By such ignorance, the living entity accepts the material body, which is made of 5 elements, as himself. With this misunderstanding, he accepts non-permanent things as his own and increases his ignorance in the darkest region. Text 31. For the sake of the body, which is a source of constant trouble to him and which follows him, because he is bonded by ties of ignorance and futile activities, he performs various actions which causes him to be subjugated to repeated birth and death. Text 32. If therefore the living entity again associates with the path of unrighteousness, influenced by sensually minded people engaged in pursuit of sexual enjoyment and the gratification of the palate, he again goes to hell as before. Text 33. He becomes devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, gravity, spiritual intelligence, shyness, austerity, fame, forgiveness, control of mind, control of senses, fortune, and all such opportunities. Text 34. One should not associate with coarse fool, who is bereft of the knowledge of self-realization and who is no more than dancing dog in the hands of a woman. Text 35. The inertia and bondage which occurs to the man from attachment to any other objects is not as complete as resulting from attachment to a woman or to the fellowship of men who are found by women. Text 36. At the sight of his own daughter, Brahma was bewildered by her charm and shamelessly ran up to her in her form in her in the form of sage when she shook the form of her form of a hind. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you so much, Mother. Hare Krishna. Yeah, Chaitanya Chandra Prabhu, whenever you're ready, you can start, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanal Pranam. Thank you, Albeli Mataji, for reading. Thank you all the devotees for attending. I'm going to start off with prayers, offering prayers. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Pashchat Deshatarane जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे मुखं करोति वाचालं भंगुं लंघयति गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुदीनतारणम् Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss. For my own purification and for the pleasure of all the assembled Vaishnavas, we'll be reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, third Canto, chapter 31, and we'll be continuing from text 25 onwards. So just to give a brief overview, so far we have discussed in the previous chapter how Lord Kapiladev is speaking to Mother Devahuti, and he describes the different miseries that a living entity has to go through. In the previous chapter, he discussed about miseries related to old age, disease, and death. And then in the beginning of this chapter, he starts describing the journey of the fetus once a living entity takes shelter of a mother's womb, all the different kind of miseries he experiences. And in yesterday's discussion with Krishnadas Prabhu, so wonderfully explained the beautiful prayers that the Jivatma offers in order to remember Krishna in that particular predicament and be delivered from this miserable situation. And at the end, we saw how, despite all that, he's forced to take birth because of the air that pushes him out. And finally, this living entity now arrives into the material world. And as soon as he arrives, he begins experiencing different kinds of miseries that we'll be sharing. In text 25, it's described that after coming out of the abdomen, the child is given care of persons who are unable to understand what he wants, and thus he is nursed by such persons. So when a human child is born, he doesn't have any way to express himself, communicate his needs and all. So he suffers tremendously because of it. Prabhupada describes in the purport that sometimes a child is crying, and we have practical experience of this, and we don't know what to do. Now the child may be crying because of hunger. Prabhupada writes that the nurse may think that the child wants some medicine or his tummy is aching. And then instead of getting milk, sweet milk from his mother, he ends up getting bitter medicine from the nurse. So in this way, he's wanting one thing and he keeps getting another thing. Similar to a situation that we also experience as we grow up. There are a lot of times things don't happen in life the way we want it. We have to undergo this disease. The next thing that this living entity experiences is, when the baby is laid down in a bed, oftentimes, it'll poop and pee in the bed itself, and sometimes the beds will get dirty. Nowadays we use diaper, but still it stays in the diaper for quite some time. And as a result of it, the child suffers. It suffers itching, but it cannot even know what it means to itch, where to itch, how to itch. You can't even sit up or stand or even move. So this is a very painful situation for the child, which, again, all of us have gone through, having come into this material world. But because of our desire to enjoy, we've forgotten all these miseries that we had experienced. There's a wonderful bhajan by His Grace Divine Grace Bhakti Vinod Thakur called Bhuliya Tumhare Samsare Ashiya. In that bhajan, Bhakti Vinod Thakur wonderfully describes how the living entity who so sincerely prayed to remember Krishna at every step, how once he enters into the material world, he keeps forgetting Krishna at each step, and what kind of miseries he goes through as well. So if devotees have a chance, I would like to recommend them to listen to this bhajan by His Divine Grace Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So moving on, this infant child in this helpless condition, because he cannot move, he cannot complain, he cannot communicate. Different kinds of mosquitoes, bugs, germs, they bite the baby whose skin is tender, just as smaller worms bite a big worm. And the child, deprived of his wisdom, cries bitterly. So in this one, purport to this beautiful verse, Srila Prabhupada describes, he lays emphasis to this word, Rudantam Vigata Jnanam. Rudatna means he cries, and the reason he cries is because of ignorance. Vigata Jnanam. His jnana, his knowledge is covered once he enters into this material world. Prabhupada describes that circumstantially, everybody is prone to forgetting Krishna in this material world. That is how Maya works. That is the first thing that Maya does, is takes away our remembrance of Krishna. That is why so Prabhupada recommends that for a child, or also for people who are elderly, it is very, very important that they stay in such favorable situation, because their consciousness becomes limited, their intelligence becomes limited, that they can always, in one form or another, remember Krishna. In this world, to fall down is very easy, because there's the force of gravity, and gravity pulls everything down. So in spiritual life also, to fall down is very easy. But in order to remember Krishna, to stand up against the force of Maya, and to build something up against gravity is very difficult. Despite all the miseries and the predicaments that we have in our life, one thing I'd like to share with devotees is very, very important that we don't forget Krishna at any moment. We may be in the worst situation, in the worst material state, but as long as we can remember Krishna, we will be fine. Forgetting Krishna is the greatest misery that a living entity can bear. With this, I remember an example of a wonderful, great Vaishnava, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He had shared at the end of his life, when he was close to leaving his body, and his body was riddled with cancer, and he was in excruciating material pain. He had shared this wonderful realization where, he the devotees that, though I'm experiencing such excruciating pain, but in my heart, I'm able to remember Krishna so clearly, and I'm so blissful that I will not, even if there was an option, I would not exchange my position with anybody else, because at this moment I can remember Krishna very clearly. So, dear devotees, it is again very, very important that in whatever predicament we are, as long as we can remember Krishna, that situation is not as bad. And in any situation we forget Krishna, that is the worst situation we can be. In text 28, goes on to describe now, the living entity now moves on from the the child phase into the boyhood phase. And once he reaches the boyhood phase, he suffers different kinds of distress. Prabhupada writes in the purport that that phase from 0 to 5 is the child phase. From 5 to 15 is called Poganda stage. And after 16 onwards, it's the youth phase. So once he reaches the Poganda stage, or the boyhood stage, he suffers lots of pain because he has multiple desires. Now his desire to enjoy is starting to manifest. He can express himself, his consciousness is also growing. But then he starts realizing how all these desires are not being fulfilled. He may ask for one thing and not get it. Prabhupada describes that as young children, oftentimes they may not want to go to school. They don't want to pursue education. They want to go out and play. But then they're forced to, go to school and obtain education. So a lot of things don't happen the way they thought should happen. Things should happen in the way they wanted it, and thus he starts suffering from a lot of disappointment. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. In text 29, the further journey of the soul is described that with the growth of the body, the living entity, in order to vanquish his soul, increases his false prestige and anger, and thereby creates enemy towards similarly lusty people. As he advances in boyhood and starts getting a sense of his own, he starts identifying himself more and more with the body. As he identifies more with the body, he starts getting absorbed more with things that are related to his body and things that will bring him material satisfaction. Krishna describes in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Dhyayato Vishaya Pumsaha Sangaste Supajayate Sangata Sanjayate Kamaha Kamaha Krodho Vijayate. It starts off with contemplating on the objects of sense gratification. So in this phase, the living entity now starts contemplating. I want this, I want that, this is mine, that is mine. So he starts identifying that and starts experiencing his ability to enjoy. And once he does that, oftentimes the way the material world is designed, his desires will not be fulfilled. And then Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha, Kamaha Krodho Vijayate. And then Krodha or anger develops from that. Prabhupada writes in the purport that when lust develops, which originates from the mode of passion, the lust contracts our consciousness. And when that lust is unfulfilled, that transforms into anger. And anger contracts our consciousness even more, having originated from the mode of ignorance. So in that way, under the influence of lust and anger, the consciousness of a soul is steadily being covered more and more, and he keeps getting more bound to this material world. To raise oneself from hellish life to the highest planet of spiritual understanding is to transform lust into love. In the purport to this wonderful verse, Prabhupada shares a prayer by Narottam Das Thakur. In that he describes how the different things that bind us to this material world, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moha, Mad, how all of these entities can actually help liberate us also, instead of binding us in this material world. Narottam Das Thakur prays, Kama Krishna Karmarpane, that whatever sense desires we have for sense gratification, we should use that in service of Krishna. So if we have desire to eat something nice, we can cook something nice for Krishna, offer it as bhoga, and then accept that as prasadam, the remnants. So similarly, the different objects of senses that we want to enjoy, if we engage them in service of Krishna, then we can overcome this most devastating enemy of Kam. Krodha Bhakta Dvesha Jane. The next enemy that we try to conquer or afflicted by us, anger or krodha. And how we can overcome krodha is the way Hanumanji just showed us, by using our anger against people who tend to harm devotees or blaspheme supreme personality of Godhead. So by directing our anger towards them, we can purify this aparadha. Lobha sadhu sanga hari katha. So Kama, Krodha, Lobh, The tendency of greed that we have, that I want this to be mine, I want to accumulate this, that can be overcome by having greed or lobha for sadhu sangha. So sadhu sangha and Krishna katha. So if we are greedy, if we are always searching, where can I get sadhu sangha? Where can I get more association? I can have Friday evening program, Saturday bhakti vriksha, Sunday program. If we maintain this strong desire, then we can purify ourselves. Recently, I listened to a lecture and in that lecture, Maharaj was describing how, the most benefit we can derive from listening to a lecture is when we have this strong sense of urgency and this greed to learn more from it. For example, if somebody offers us a nice food platter, but we are not hungry, we don't even have an appetite, we probably will not enjoy it much or accept much from it. But if we have this strong desire or this greed to understand Krishna Katha, to be nourished from Krishna Katha, to understand how much suffering there is in this material world, if we understand that we are not in a comfortable position, we're actually in a very terrible situation, then we will develop this greed to hear Krishna Katha. And that greed can help purify us, is what Narottam Das Thakur says. Moha ishta labda bine. The next thing Narottam Das Thakur prays is this, I'll be bewildered by when I see the wonderful form, beautiful form of my deities, Shri Radha Madhav. That beautiful glance of Shri Radha Madhav will cause us bewilderment, and that we can use in service of Krishna. Madha Krishna Gunagane. And I'll become mad, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moha, Mad, intoxicated when I do Krishna Gungan or sing the glories of Krishna in Sankirtan. In this way, Prabhupada recommends to us that we can follow in the footsteps of Narottam Das Thakur, and all these aparads, all these shortcomings that the living entity starts to acquire, we can each transform each of them to help liberate us from this material condition. In text 30, it is described that by such ignorance, the living entity accepts the material body, which is made of 5 elements, as himself. With this misunderstanding, he accepts non-permanent things as his own and increases his ignorance in the darkest stage. When Srila Prabhupada had once traveled to the United Kingdom, on the airport, he was interviewed by some reporters, and the reporters asked him, so, Swamiji, like so many people have come from the West, and they've come and done this magic and this yoga, and they've showed us this. What have you come to teach us? What new thing are you going to offer us? And Prabhupada very wittily replied that I'm not come here to teach you anything new. I've only come here to remind you what you have forgotten. And this ability to forget, this tendency to forget, lands us into ignorance. And that is what binds this living entity to the material body. And once he's bound to the material body, he starts accepting everything as mine. This body is mine, this family is mine, this country is mine, this house is mine. And everything begins from this false association of, or this thinking of that the material body, he is once living entity identifies himself with the material body. In this verse, Gurujan Prabhu had very nicely mentioned that instead of identifying with the material body and getting false pride, the opposite of that should be humility. So in his book, In the Lotus Feet of Krishna, Gurujan Prabhu shared that real humility means not material insignificance. So humility does not mean of thinking oneself as less, but thinking less of oneself. Thinking that always how we can be engaged in the service of Krishna and be an instrument in the hands of our Guru Maharaj and in the hands of Krishna and his devotees. In that way, if we connect to the Supreme Personality, we can always serve him in this humble mood. Next shloka in 31, it is described that the living entity, for the sake of the body, which is a source of constant trouble to him and which follows him because he is bound by ties of ignorance and fruitive activities, performs various actions which cause him to be subjected to repeated birth and death. So once he forgets his eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets bound to the material body and all the karmas and all the activities that are related to the material body. And as such, once he's bound by them, he keeps performing various actions to satisfy his material needs, and that keeps getting him bound further and further and into the cycle of birth and death. Prabhupada describes in the purport how in this modern world there is this concept of the blind leading the blind, because everybody or at least the leaders of society are also in this bodily consciousness, because they are not in Krishna consciousness. They are blind to the reality of this material world and the temporary nature of this material world. So just as a blind leading a blind would fall into a ditch, we see how modern day governments and leaders, because they're bereft of this knowledge, the way society is heading and the different problems the society is facing right now is because the leaders themselves do not know what needs to be done. In text 32 is described, if therefore the living entity associates again with the path of unrighteousness, influenced by sensually minded people engaged in pursuit of sexual enjoyment and the gratification of the palate, he again goes to hell as before. So we just saw how much suffering the living entity just went through. He went through hellish planets, then he took shelter of mother's womb, he went through so much suffering in the womb, and finally he remembered Krishna. He prayed to Krishna to deliver himself. But as soon as he comes into this material world, he lost that knowledge and went into ignorance. And where he had this one opportunity to deliver himself and to ask questions and to understand how he can deliver himself from this misery, he starts actually enjoying this miserable condition. You know, Maharaj also describes that this material world is like a jail, but it's such a wonderful jail that nobody wants to even come out of it, because people are suffering, but in the same point they feel that we are enjoying a lot. So because of association, because of associating with people, Prabhupada describes that the formula for this materialists are eat, drink, and be merry. If you ask anybody in this material world, generally we greet them and say, Hare Krishna, how are you doing? And everybody says, oh, I'm very good. Everything is good. We're used to this concept of saying everything is good because we want to believe that things are very happy and fine in this material world. Whereas we know that so many problems are that each individual goes through in this life. In this regard, a devotee had shared the example of Ajamil, that Ajamil was a very pure soul, and he was very kind and a humble servant, and used to serve his father so well. But just because he went to the forest to collect woods, the moment he saw a man who was drunk, intoxicated, enjoying with a prostitute, even that much association bewildered him, and then he started associating with that prostitute and started accumulating all the negative qualities of unrighteousness, and being unclean from that simple momentary association. In text 33, it is described, he becomes devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, gravity, spiritual intelligence. So all these qualities, again, when we look at Ajamil's pastime, we see that once he got bewildered by the association of the prostitute, in order to satisfy his family needs, his material needs, and to make her happy, he would engage in illegal activities. He would live in an fashion, very grossly absorbed in material sense enjoyment, and he lost his wonderful qualities that he had. So in this regard, it is recommended that we have to be very, very careful to avoid such association. Lord Chaitanya had also recommended that association with the other gender, just for the purpose of sense enjoyment, is like spiritual suicide. In the Chaitanya Leela, there is a mention of a devotee, Chota Haridas, who was a very was a close associate of the Lord and a part of his Kirtan party. Was a wonderful Kirtanya, but at one point of time, he lustily looked at another woman, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu became aware of it, and he immediately rejected him from his association. And after a year, Chutari Das had to give up his body for that aparadha. That is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructs us that it is very, very important that we do not associate with the other gender just for the purpose of sense gratification. There are obviously different ashramas in the Varnashram system, of which only one ashram, the Grihas ashram, there is the opportunity to mix with the other gender for the purpose of spiritual upliftment, to help each other in spiritual life, and to give birth to Krishna conscious children and raise them in a spiritual atmosphere. Whereas the other three ashrams, the Brahmacharya, the Vanaprasth, and Sannyas ashram, association with the other gender is forbidden. In text 34, Lord Kapiladev goes on to describe that one should not associate with a coarse fool who is bereft of the knowledge of self-realization and is no more than a dancing dog in the hands of. In text 35, it's described that the infatuation and bondage which accrue to a man from attachment to any other object is not as complete as that resulting from attachment to a woman or to the fellowship of men who are fond of women. So, Prabhupada describes that of all the different attractions that are there, the attraction to the other gender is the strongest and the most difficult to overcome. In every step, Prabhupada describes in the purport that this material world, the society, the way they've created, is it's difficult to avoid association of the opposite gender. Prabhupada mentions that even if you go out to get grocery, there's big billboards and big advertisements everywhere that there's beautiful women that they're selling different products. So it's very easy to get distracted. But as long as we stay in the association of devotees, we can be reminded of our duty and be able to stay away from this association. In this regard, there was an event from where Prabhupada was traveling with a young brahmachari in the airport, and when as they were walking by, there was a Mataji who passed by who appeared very attractive. So the brahmachari just unconsciously, not realizing, turned around and looked at it, and looked at that Mataji. And Prabhupada, the next moment, he looked up and he saw Prabhupada looking at him, looking at that Mataji. And so Prabhupada asked him, so isn't she attractive? And the devotee did not know what to say. He was ashamed, so he just hung his head down. So Prabhupada then reminded him, so if she's attractive, just remember how much more attractive is that Supreme Personality of Godhead who created her. So in this fashion, as long as we stay in the association of devotees and pure Vaishnavas, we will be able to stay free from this attachment. It's also said, there's a common saying in modern day world that behind every successful man, there is a hand of a woman. But behind every unsuccessful man, there is the hand of many women. In the last shloka for the day, it's described that even very, very powerful personalities like Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, as described in the purport by Prabhupada, they were bewildered by the opposite gender, and Brahma by his own creation, and how they were themselves attracted to the other gender and could not remember true knowledge at that time. So that is why these examples are given in the Shastra for us to realize. This is for our purification, our realization that when such great personalities and wonderful devotees are themselves come under the influence of this, the influence of the opposite gender, how much more careful do we have to be, being, and speaking for myself, in a neophyte stage, to avoid this association inappropriately. And that is why in our society, in ISKCON, we have so much separation between Prabhujis and Matajis in terms of physical arrangements in the temple, just so that we are careful while maintaining any association with the other gender. All right, so with this, I think I will end today's discussion. Thank you everybody for sharing, for participating. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chaitanya Chandra Prabhu, for the wonderful class. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.